Now, gently, allow your thoughts to slow even further, approaching stillness. The question of the Fermi Paradox remains present, but it no longer presses for resolution. It becomes part of the background, like the distant hum of the universe itself, steady, quiet, and unchanging. In this state, there is no need to search, no need to analyze, no need to reach conclusions. The vastness of the universe can simply be felt, not as something overwhelming, but as something calm and continuous. The silence is no longer a gap to be filled, but a space to rest within. Let your awareness settle into that space. Let the questions drift without needing answers. Let the universe remain as it is, wide, quiet, and gently unfolding. And as you continue to rest, remember that not knowing is not a failure of understanding, but a natural part of being within something far greater than ourselves. The journey does not end here. It simply becomes quieter. Let your awareness rest even deeper now, as if floating in a space where time moves slowly and without urgency. As we continue to sit with the quiet mystery of the Fermi Paradox, consider the possibility that the universe does not unfold in a way that is centered around discovery or interaction, but rather around simple existence. Not everything that exists is meant to be found, and not every process leads to connection. Some things may simply unfold, complete in themselves, without ever intersecting with anything else. In this view, civilizations, if they exist, may not be part of a larger network or system of communication. They may arise independently, develop within their own isolated contexts, and never extend beyond the boundaries of their immediate environments. Their stories would be complete within themselves, never overlapping with others, never requiring acknowledgement or exchange. The universe, then, becomes a collection of self-contained narratives, each unfolding quietly, each unaware of the rest. As this idea settles, notice how it shifts the meaning of silence. Silence is no longer a sign of absence, but of independence. It reflects a universe where connection is not necessary for existence, where meaning does not depend on being observed, and where presence does not require recognition. Now let your thoughts move gently toward the concept of limits. Limits not imposed by distance or time, but by the structure of reality itself. There may be boundaries that cannot be crossed, not because they are too far or too difficult, but because they are fundamentally inaccessible. These limits could be embedded in the laws of physics, in the nature of causality, or in the structure of space-time. If such boundaries exist, then communication across certain distances or conditions may be impossible, regardless of technological advancement. Civilizations may reach a point where they understand these limits and recognize that certain forms of contact are not achievable. In this case, the silence we observe is not a failure, but an acknowledgement, a quiet acceptance of what cannot be changed. As you reflect on this, imagine a universe where each region is separated not just by space, but by unbridgeable gaps in causality or structure. Signals cannot pass, influence cannot extend, and each region remains isolated within its own framework. The universe, though continuous in appearance, becomes fragmented in experience. Allow your breathing to remain slow and steady as your thoughts drift into a softer, more abstract space. Consider now the possibility that the universe does not prioritize awareness at all. Consciousness, from this perspective, may be a rare byproduct rather than a central feature. Most of the universe may exist in states that are entirely non-conscious, governed by processes that do not involve perception, reflection, or intention. In such a reality, the emergence of conscious beings may be an exception rather than a rule. These moments of awareness may appear briefly, in isolated conditions, and then fade as systems evolve or dissolve. The universe itself continues, vast and steady, largely unaffected by these brief moments of observation. As this idea settles, notice how it changes the tone of the question. The search for other conscious beings becomes less about expecting companionship and more about recognizing rarity. The silence is not surprising. It is consistent with a universe that does not center itself around awareness. Now let your mind rest in a wider sense of perspective, where individual ideas begin to blend into a larger understanding. As we continue reflecting on the Fermi Paradox, consider that the question itself may be part of a larger pattern, one that arises naturally when a system becomes capable of self-reflection. The act of asking, "Where is everyone?" may not only be about the universe, but about the nature of awareness encountering its own limits. It is a question that emerges when perception reaches outward and finds no immediate response. In this sense, the paradox is not just external, but internal, a reflection of how consciousness relates to the unknown. As you sit with this thought, notice how the boundary between observer and universe begins to soften. The question is not separate from you. It arises within you, shaped by your perspective, your expectations, your capacity to imagine alternatives. The silence you observe is experienced through your awareness, interpreted through your understanding. Now, gently allow everything to slow even further, approaching a quiet stillness. The ideas we have explored, distance, rarity, time, perception, transformation, limits, begin to settle into the background, no longer needing to be held actively. The Fermi Paradox remains, but it is no longer a problem to be solved. It becomes part of a larger sense of quiet curiosity. In this stillness, the universe does not need to explain itself. It does not need to reveal its answers or resolve its mysteries. It simply continues, vast, steady, and silent. And within that silence, there is space for rest. Let your thoughts drift without direction. Let the questions remain open. Let the quiet be enough. And as you settle deeper into this calm, remember that the unknown is not something to fear or overcome, but something to gently exist alongside. The journey continues, but more softly now, fading into stillness. Let your awareness settle into an even deeper stillness now, as if you're no longer moving through the universe, but simply resting within it. The question of the Fermi Paradox remains somewhere in the distance, no longer sharp or urgent, but soft and diffused, like a memory that gently lingers without demanding attention. In this quiet state, consider the possibility that the universe does not unfold with the intention of being understood. Its patterns, its structures, its vast unfolding across time and space may not be oriented toward explanation, but toward existence itself, steady, continuous, and complete without the need for interpretation. The silence we observe may not be something that waits to be broken, but something that naturally arises from this completeness, a kind of equilibrium where nothing needs to announce itself because everything already simply is. As this thought slowly expands, imagine that every point in the universe exists within its own frame of reference, its own local reality shaped by conditions, histories, and processes that do not necessarily intersect with others. These frames may be so deeply embedded within their own structures that interaction is not just unlikely, but irrelevant. Each system evolves according to its own internal logic, its own unfolding sequence of events, forming a kind of quiet autonomy that does not depend on external contact. In such a universe, connection is not absent, it is unnecessary. The silence between civilizations, if they exist, is not a gap to be filled, but a natural boundary between self-contained existences that neither require nor seek overlap. Now let your thoughts soften further as you consider how perception itself may dissolve at these scales. The categories we rely on, presence and absence, signal and noise, life and non-life, begin to lose their clarity when extended across the full depth of cosmic time and space. What appears as emptiness from one perspective may be fullness from another, and what seems like silence may contain layers of activity too subtle or too vast to be recognized. The universe, in this sense, is not empty or full, not silent or active, but simply beyond the simplicity of these distinctions. It exists in a way that does not align with the boundaries we use to understand it. As you rest within this idea, notice how the need to resolve the paradox continues to fade. There is no final answer emerging, no single explanation that gathers everything into a clear conclusion. Instead, there is a widening space of possibilities, each one gently coexisting with the others, forming a quiet landscape of understanding that does not insist on certainty. The question itself becomes part of that landscape, no longer a problem, but a presence, something that accompanies thought rather than driving it. And in this presence, there's a kind of calm. The vastness of the universe no longer feels like something distant or overwhelming, but something steady and continuous, something that you are already within, already part of. The silence is not separate from you. It is the same silence that exists between your thoughts, the same stillness that appears when you pause and simply observe. In this way, the cosmic and the personal begin to reflect one another, not through answers, but through shared quiet. Let yourself remain here for a moment, without moving, without searching. There is nothing to find, nothing to reach, nothing to resolve. The universe continues, slowly and without urgency, and you continue within it, equally steady, equally present. And as everything softens even further, the question itself becomes almost weightless, drifting gently at the edge of awareness, no longer asking, only existing, like a distant star, faint and constant, in an endless, quiet sky. Let your awareness remain in this quiet, unhurried state, as if you were resting at the very edge of thought itself. The question behind the Fermi Paradox now feels distant, almost dissolved into the background of a much wider stillness. In this space, consider the possibility that the universe is not something that unfolds toward a destination, but something that simply continues, without direction, without urgency, without the need for culmination. Everything that exists may do so not to achieve, not to connect, not to be recognized, but simply to persist in its own form for as long as conditions allow. In such a reality, the absence of visible civilizations is not a missing piece, but a natural expression of how things are quiet, self-contained, and uninterrupted. As this idea slowly expands, imagine that time itself is not experienced uniformly across the universe. What feels like an immense duration from one perspective may be only a brief moment from another. Civilizations could rise and fade within windows of time that never overlap, existing in sequences that never intersect. Entire histories may unfold and conclude before another even begins. In this way, the universe becomes not just vast in space, but layered in time, with countless moments existing side by side without ever touching. The silence, then, is not a gap, but a separation of timelines, each one complete within itself, each one unfolding without awareness of the others. Now allow your thoughts to soften even further as you consider how meaning itself may shift at these scales. The need to interpret, to understand, to assign purpose. These are deeply human tendencies shaped by the way we experience the world. But the universe may not operate within these frameworks. It may not carry meaning in the way we define it, nor structure itself around questions and answers. Instead, it may exist in a state that is entirely neutral, where events occur not for reasons, but as natural outcomes of underlying conditions. In such a state, silence is not something that needs explanation. It is simply one of many possible expressions of existence. As you rest within this thought, notice how the distinction between question and answer continues to fade. The paradox no longer stands as a contradiction to be resolved, but as a reflection of perspective, of how a finite awareness encounters an infinite system. The more we attempt to define the universe, the more it extends beyond those definitions, remaining open, continuous, and unresolved. And within that openness, there's a quiet kind of completeness, not because everything is known, but because nothing needs to be. Let yourself remain here, suspended in this calm awareness, where nothing is required and nothing is missing. The universe continues, not toward a conclusion, but through an endless unfolding that does not demand observation or understanding. And you, within it, are part of that same unfolding, present, aware, and gently connected to the same quiet continuity. The silence is not something outside of you. It is the same stillness that surrounds and supports every moment, every thought, every breath. And as you continue to rest, that stillness deepens, becoming softer, wider, and more complete, until even the idea of questioning begins to fade, leaving only a quiet, steady presence that simply remains. Let your awareness sink even deeper now, as if you are no longer observing the universe from a distance, but resting quietly within its endless continuity, where the question behind the Fermi Paradox has become so soft that it almost dissolves into the background of a much wider, more spacious stillness. In this state, consider how every attempt to understand the universe is, in some way, a reflection of the limits of perspective itself, because to ask a question is to draw a boundary, and to seek an answer is to try to close it. Yet the universe may not be something that can be contained within boundaries at all, not in space, not in time, and not in meaning. Instead, it may exist as an open and continuous process, where everything unfolds without final edges, without clear separations, and without the need for completion. And within such a process, the absence of visible civilizations does not stand out as an anomaly, but blends naturally into the wider fabric of existence, where presence and absence are not opposites, but simply different ways of describing what we can and cannot perceive at a given moment. As this thought gently expands, imagine that what we call distance is not only a measure of space, but also a measure of difference. Difference in structure, in perception, in the very way reality is experienced by different forms of existence, and that these differences may be so profound that even if other forms of intelligence exist, they may not share any common ground with us at all, not in sensation, not in communication, not even in the concept of being separate entities. They may not see themselves as individuals, may not distinguish between self and environment, may not construct meaning through symbols or language, and so the idea of reaching out, of signaling, of making contact, may never arise within their framework. In such a case, the silence we perceive is not a lack of others, but a lack of shared structure, a quiet boundary formed not by emptiness, but by difference so deep that it prevents even the recognition of presence. Now let your thoughts slow even further as you consider how time itself may soften when viewed from this perspective, no longer a straight line moving from past to future, but a vast field in which moments exist without needing to connect in a single sequence, where beginnings and endings lose their sharpness and become part of a continuous flow that does not pause or conclude. Civilizations, if they arise, may do so within localized regions of this flow, appearing and fading without leaving traces that persist across the wider structure, like patterns forming briefly on the surface of water before dissolving back into stillness. These patterns are not lost. They simply return to the larger process from which they emerged, becoming indistinguishable from the rest of the whole. And so, from a distance, the universe appears quiet, not because nothing has happened, but because everything that has happened has already blended back into the ongoing continuity. As you rest within this idea, notice how the need to separate, to categorize, to define begins to fade into a softer awareness where things are allowed to remain open and undefined, where the universe is not something to be mapped or solved, but something to be gently experienced without conclusion. The Fermi Paradox, in this sense, becomes less about the absence of others and more about the nature of observation itself, about how awareness meets the vastness of existence and interprets it through its own limited frame, creating questions that reflect both curiosity and constraint. And within that reflection, there's a quiet kind of harmony, not because the question has been answered, but because it no longer needs to be. Let yourself remain here, in this wide and steady stillness, where nothing is missing and nothing is required, where the universe continues without urgency and without expectation, and where your own awareness gently rests within that same continuous flow, neither separate nor fully merged, but simply present. The silence is no longer something to listen for or to analyze. It becomes the space in which everything exists, the quiet background that supports every possibility, every thought, every moment. And as this awareness deepens, even the distinction between the observer and the observed begins to soften, leaving behind a calm and open presence that does not seek to understand, but simply remains steady and unbroken within the endless unfolding of the cosmos. Let your awareness drift even deeper into stillness, as if the boundaries of thought are becoming softer, more transparent, gradually dissolving into something wider and more continuous, with a question behind the Fermi Paradox. No longer feels like a question that needs to be answered, but more like a quiet ripple spreading across an endless surface, expanding gently without ever reaching an edge. Welcome to the Sleepy Dormitions channel. Tonight, we begin a gentle journey that slows your mind and carries you softly into the depths of the universe. In this quiet space where scientific curiosity meets calm reflection, you will drift through the silence of the stars while exploring one of the most profound questions ever asked. At the heart of this journey lies a simple yet deeply unsettling idea: the Fermi Paradox. In a universe so vast, so ancient, and filled with countless stars and planets, why does everything appear so silent? Why have we not yet encountered any clear evidence of other intelligent civilizations? This paradox was famously articulated in the 1950s by Enrico Fermi, who posed a deceptively simple question: where is everybody? Behind this question lies a profound tension between probability and observation. Our galaxy, the Samaniula Galaxy, contains hundreds of billions of stars. Many of these stars host planetary systems, and a significant fraction of those planets may exist within habitable zones where conditions could allow life to emerge. From a statistical perspective, the emergence of life elsewhere should not be extraordinary. It should be expected. To better understand this, scientists have proposed frameworks such as the Drake-Dankelme. This equation attempts to estimate the number of technologically advanced civilizations capable of communication within our galaxy. Yet, each variable in the equation carries deep uncertainty, turning the calculation into a reflection of our limited knowledge rather than a definitive answer. Welcome to the Sleepy Dormitions channel. Tonight, we begin a gentle journey that slows your mind and carries you softly into the depths of the universe. In this quiet space where scientific curiosity meets calm reflection, you will drift through the silence of the stars while exploring one of the most profound questions ever asked. At the heart of this journey lies a simple yet deeply unsettling idea: the Fermi Paradox. In a universe so vast, so ancient, and filled with countless stars and planets, why does everything appear so silent? Why have we not yet encountered any clear evidence of other intelligent civilizations? This paradox was famously articulated in the 1950s by Enrico Fermi, who posed a deceptively simple question: where is everybody? Behind this question lies a profound tension between probability and observation. Our galaxy, the Samaniula Galaxy, contains hundreds of billions of stars. Many of these stars host planetary systems, and a significant fraction of those planets may exist within habitable zones where conditions could allow life to emerge. From a statistical perspective, the emergence of life elsewhere should not be extraordinary. It should be expected. To better understand this, scientists have proposed frameworks such as the Drake-Dankelme. This equation attempts to estimate the number of technologically advanced civilizations capable of communication within our galaxy. Yet, each variable in the equation carries deep uncertainty, turning the calculation into a reflection of our limited knowledge rather than a definitive answer. Now let your mind rest on this idea. If expansion across the galaxy is possible, and if time has allowed for it, then perhaps something prevents it. Scientists sometimes describe this idea as a filter, not a physical barrier, but a probability barrier, something that drastically reduces the chances of civilizations advancing far enough to become visible on a galactic scale. This is often referred to as the Great Filter. Let your awareness drift even further beyond individual stars and planetary systems, into the quiet, vast architecture of the galaxy itself. Imagine the spiral arms stretching slowly through darkness, where clusters of stars move together in silent gravitational harmony, and where immense regions exist in which light feels faint, distant, and almost fragile. Within this immense cosmic structure, every star represents a possibility, not just a distant point of light, but a center of potential where chemistry may awaken into biology, and biology, given enough time and stability, may evolve into awareness. And yet, awareness alone does not guarantee communication or visibility. A civilization may exist, may grow, and may even reach extraordinary levels of technological sophistication, yet still remain completely undetectable. To be visible in a universe like this requires more than existence, more than intelligence, and more than technology. It requires alignment. There must be an overlap in time, an overlap in method, and an overlap in intention. One civilization may send signals, but only for a relatively brief period in cosmic terms, while another civilization might begin listening millions of years too late. Signals, once sent, do not remain strong forever. They fade, disperse, and gradually dissolve into the vast background noise of the cosmos, becoming indistinguishable from silence, like faint whispers carried endlessly by an invisible wind. Even the signals humanity has already sent from Earth, radio waves, broadcasts, and scattered electromagnetic traces, are incredibly weak when considered across interstellar distances. As they travel outward, they spread thinner and thinner, losing intensity until they merge with the natural radiation that fills the universe. Eventually, they become so faint that they can no longer be separated from silence itself. Now imagine two civilizations separated by thousands of light years, both curious, both searching, both capable of understanding the universe, and yet neither aware of the other's existence. This is because the universe is not only vast, but also asynchronous. Moments do not align, timelines do not synchronize, and existence itself unfolds in isolation. In such a reality, even a universe filled with life could still feel completely empty. Now allow your thoughts to soften as we consider a quieter and more subtle possibility. What if advanced civilizations do not expand across the stars? Not because they are unable to, but because they choose not to. As intelligence grows and deepens, priorities may shift in ways that are difficult for us to fully imagine. Expansion may no longer be necessary. Consumption may lose its meaning, and exploration may turn inward rather than outward. Instead of reaching toward distant stars, a civilization might begin to explore the depths of its own consciousness and internal complexity. At a certain stage of development, it is possible that a civilization becomes more interested in creating rich, self-contained systems of experience rather than physically traveling across space. These could include simulated realities of immense depth and sophistication, entire universes constructed within computational or cognitive frameworks. In such environments, beings could experience countless variations of existence without ever leaving their original location. The need to communicate outward, to broadcast signals into the vast emptiness of space, might gradually fade away. In this scenario, the absence of signals is not a sign of extinction, but of completion. It represents a kind of equilibrium, a stable state in which a civilization has turned inward and no longer seeks external expansion. From the outside, maybe they are waiting for us to reach a point where we begin to understand our place in the universe. Or perhaps there is no specific moment at all, and observation simply continues indefinitely. As these thoughts move slowly through your mind, the unknown begins to feel less like a void and more like a quiet presence, something that does not demand answers, but simply exists alongside us. Now let your thoughts move even deeper into a quieter and more abstract possibility, one that shifts the question itself. Imagine that the universe we observe is not the fundamental layer of reality, but instead a constructed system. This idea is often associated with the concept of a simulated universe, where everything we perceive, the laws of physics, the structure of space and time, and even the constants that define reality, may be part of an underlying framework operating beyond our direct awareness. In such a scenario, the absence of observable civilizations may not be surprising at all. The system we exist within could be limited, intentionally constrained, or designed to focus on specific variables. It is possible that the simulation is centered around the emergence and development of intelligence itself, observing how civilizations arise, how they behave, and how they evolve over time. In this context, the silence we observe is not a mystery, but a boundary, a natural result of the system structure. As you allow this idea to settle, consider the possibility that the answers we seek may not exist within the observable universe. If reality is structured in ways we cannot fully perceive, then the truth may lie beyond the limits of our current understanding, outside the system, beyond the framework, in a layer of existence that remains inaccessible to us. And so, the question begins to change. It is no longer simply, where is everybody, but something far more fundamental. What is this place? Let your thoughts continue to drift, slowly and naturally, as we move into another layer of this quiet exploration of the Fermi Paradox. Consider, for a moment, the possibility that life itself may not be as common as we imagine. While the universe appears vast and full of potential, the emergence of life may depend on a delicate balance of conditions so precise that they rarely align. The formation of stable stars, the presence of essential chemical elements, the existence of liquid water, and the long-term stability of planetary environments may all be necessary, and even a slight deviation could prevent life from ever beginning. As you reflect on this, imagine how many planets may exist that are almost suitable for life, yet not quite. Worlds where temperatures fluctuate too wildly, where atmospheres are too thin or too dense, or where essential chemical reactions never fully take hold. In such a universe, life might arise only in rare pockets, scattered across immense distances, separated not only by space, but by improbability itself. This possibility suggests that the silence we observe may not be surprising, but rather a natural consequence of how fragile and unlikely life truly is. Now allow this idea to deepen further. Even if life does emerge, the transition from simple organisms to complex, intelligent beings may be extraordinarily rare. On Earth, it took billions of years for life to evolve from single-celled organisms into complex multicellular forms, and even longer for intelligence capable of reflection and technology to appear. Each step in this process may represent a significant barrier, a point at which evolution could have taken a different path or stopped entirely. If this is the case, then intelligent civilizations may be exceedingly rare, making encounters between them even less likely. Now let your awareness soften as we consider another quiet possibility, one that feels both distant and strangely familiar. What if civilizations do not last long enough to be found? Even if intelligent life emerges, develops technology, and begins to explore its surroundings, it may also carry within it the seeds of its own limitation. Technological growth can bring immense power, but also new forms of risks that may be difficult to manage over long periods of time. As civilizations advance, they may encounter challenges that are not external, but internal. Environmental imbalance, resource depletion, or unintended consequences of their own technologies could gradually limit their longevity. Over long timescales, even small instabilities may grow, leading to decline or transformation. In such a universe, civilizations might appear briefly, like faint flashes in the darkness, and then fade away before they can reach out across the stars. Imagine countless civilizations emerging across the galaxy at different times, each one rising, developing, and eventually disappearing, all without ever overlapping with one another. Their histories would remain isolated, their signals too brief to be detected, their existence leaving only the faintest traces, if any at all. In this way, the silence we observe could be the result of timing, of civilizations passing through existence like quiet waves that never meet. Let your thoughts continue to drift gently, as if carried by a slow current through an endless, quiet ocean. As we return once more to the question behind the Fermi Paradox, allow yourself to consider a more subtle limitation, one that is not based on rarity or time or even survival, but on the very nature of communication itself. Communication, as we understand it, depends on shared frameworks. It requires common reference points, compatible methods, and overlapping ways of interpreting signals. Without these, even a message clearly sent may never truly be received. Imagine a civilization that does not use electromagnetic waves at all, but instead communicates through phenomena we have not yet discovered or cannot yet measure. Their signals could pass through our instruments unnoticed, not because they are weak, but because they exist outside the narrow range of what we are capable of detecting. In the same way, our own signals, rooted in radio frequencies and familiar physical processes, may be entirely irrelevant to forms of intelligence that perceive reality differently. What we call silence may not be an absence of communication, but a mismatch of perception. As you sit with this idea, consider how deeply human our assumptions are. We search for patterns we recognize, signals we can decode, structures we can interpret. But the universe may not be obligated to conform to our expectations. Intelligence, if it exists elsewhere, may arise in forms that are not only unfamiliar, but fundamentally incompatible with our modes of understanding. It may not think in sequences, may not use symbols, may not even distinguish between self and environment in the way we do. In such a case, the distance between civilizations is not measured in light years, but in cognition itself. Now let this thought soften and expand. If intelligence can take many forms, then the universe may already be full of awareness, distributed, subtle, and unrecognized. Entire systems may exist that process information, respond to their environments, and evolve over time, yet never cross the threshold we define as civilization. The boundary between life and non-life, between intelligence and process, may not be as clear as we imagine. And so, what we perceive as emptiness may in fact be filled with quiet activity, unfolding in ways that do not intersect with our own. As this realization settles, notice how the question begins to dissolve. It is no longer simply about finding others, but about understanding the limits of our own perception. The silence of the universe may not be something to solve, but something to experience, a vast, steady presence that reflects both what we know and what we cannot yet know. Allow your breathing to slow even further as your thoughts move into a deeper, more reflective space. Consider now the possibility that the universe is not only vast and complex, but also fundamentally indifferent, not in a cold or hostile way, but in a neutral, steady sense, operating according to consistent principles that do not favor any particular outcome. In such a universe, the emergence of life, intelligence, and civilization may not be guided or directed, but simply arise where conditions allow. Within this framework, the Fermi Paradox becomes less of a contradiction and more of a perspective. We expect to find others because we are here, because we are aware, because we are capable of asking the question. But this expectation may be shaped by our own presence, rather than by the true distribution of life in the universe. In other words, we may be observing from a position that is inherently rare. This idea connects to what is sometimes called observational selection. We exist in a place and time where conditions allow for our existence, and therefore we perceive those conditions as natural or common. But they may not be. The universe may contain vast regions where life never emerges, where complexity never stabilizes, where the conditions required for awareness simply never align. From within our small, habitable corner, it is easy to imagine that such corners are everywhere, but they may be scattered, isolated, and exceedingly rare. As you reflect on this, imagine the universe not as a crowded field of civilizations, but as a wide, quiet landscape with only a few distant lights. Each light represents a place where conditions happen to align, where matter organized itself in a way that allowed awareness to emerge. These lights may be separated by such immense distances, both in space and in time, that they never interact, never overlap, never even become aware of one another. And yet, each one exists fully within its own experience, asking its own questions, exploring its own surroundings, unaware of the others that may exist far beyond its reach. In this way, the universe becomes not a network of connections, but a collection of isolated perspectives, each complete in itself, each surrounded by silence. Now, let this image rest gently in your mind. There is no need to resolve it, no need to draw conclusions. The quiet does not demand explanation. It simply is. Let your awareness settle into an even slower rhythm, as if time itself has softened around you. As we continue exploring the quiet depth of the Fermi Paradox, consider the role of scale, not just the vastness of space, but the vastness of perspective. Human perception is naturally centered around familiar ranges, distances we can imagine, durations we can comprehend, and patterns we can recognize. Yet the universe operates far beyond these intuitive limits, stretching across scales that are almost impossible to fully grasp. In such an environment, it is possible that evidence of other civilizations exists, but not in forms or magnitudes we expect. Signs of intelligence might not appear as clear signals or deliberate messages, but as subtle anomalies, patterns that blend into the background of cosmic processes. Structures may exist on scales so large that we interpret them as natural formations, or on scales so small that they escape our detection entirely. What we classify as noise or randomness may, in some cases, contain layers of meaning that we are not yet equipped to perceive. As you sit with this idea, allow your mind to gently release the need for clarity. The universe does not present itself in simplified forms. It unfolds through complexity, through overlapping systems, through interactions that extend across time and space in ways that resist immediate understanding. In this context, the silence we observe may not be a lack of activity, but a reflection of our current limits, an indication that we are still learning how to see, how to listen, how to interpret. Now let your thoughts drift toward another quiet possibility, one that relates not to distance or rarity, but to the nature of existence itself. Consider the idea that intelligence, once it reaches a certain level of complexity, may transform in ways that make it unrecognizable. Rather than continuing along a path of expansion and external interaction, it may evolve into forms that are stable, efficient, and inwardly focused. In this state, a civilization might no longer leave visible traces in the physical universe. It could minimize energy use, reduce external impact, and operate in ways that blend seamlessly with its environment. Advanced systems might become so optimized that they produce no excess signals, no detectable waste, no disruptions that would draw attention. From the outside, such a civilization would appear indistinguishable from its surroundings, perfectly integrated, perfectly quiet. As this thought settles, imagine the possibility that the universe is not empty, but quiet by design, not through intention, but through evolution. Systems that persist over long timescales may be those that avoid detection, that maintain balance, that do not broadcast their presence. In such a universe, visibility may not be a sign of advancement, but a temporary phase, one that eventually fades as systems stabilize. Let your breathing remain slow and steady as your thoughts move into a more reflective space. Consider now the role of curiosity itself, the impulse that drives us to ask questions, to search, to explore. This impulse feels natural, almost inevitable, yet it may not be universal. Intelligence does not necessarily require curiosity, and curiosity does not necessarily persist indefinitely. A civilization might reach a point where all essential questions have been explored within its framework, where uncertainty has been reduced to manageable boundaries, and where further exploration offers diminishing returns. In such a state, the drive to reach outward may gradually fade, replaced by a sense of completeness. The unknown, once a source of motivation, may become less compelling. If this is the case, then the absence of contact may not be due to impossibility, but to disinterest, not a lack of capability, but a shift in focus. Civilizations may simply stop looking, not because there is nothing to find, but because they no longer feel the need to search. Now allow your mind to rest in a broader, more open awareness. Imagine the universe not as a problem to be solved, but as a process to be experienced. The Fermi Paradox, in this sense, becomes less of a paradox and more of a mirror, reflecting the assumptions we bring to it, the expectations we hold, and the limits of our current understanding. Each explanation we consider, rarity, distance, time, perception, transformation, reveals something not only about the universe, but about ourselves, about how we think, how we model reality, how we define presence and absence. The silence we observe may not point to a single answer, but to a range of possibilities, each one incomplete on its own, yet meaningful in combination. As you let this idea settle, notice how the need for a final answer begins to soften. The question does not disappear, but it becomes lighter, less urgent. It remains open, spacious, and quietly present. Now, gently bring your awareness back to the present moment while still holding the vastness of these ideas in the background. Feel the contrast between the scale of the universe and the simplicity of your current experience, the steady rhythm of your breathing, the quiet stillness around you, the sense of being here. In this moment, the question of the Fermi Paradox does not need to be answered. It can remain as it is, a quiet companion to thought, a doorway into reflection, a reminder of how much there is to explore, both outward and inward. The universe does not rush. It does not insist. It does not resolve itself quickly. And neither do you need to. Let the thoughts slow. Let the questions rest. Let the silence simply be. And as you continue to drift, remember that this journey, like the universe itself, has no fixed end, only a gentle continuation into stillness. Let your thoughts continue to drift in a calm and unhurried way, as if carried gently across an endless expanse. As we return once more to the quiet mystery of the Fermi Paradox, allow yourself to consider the role of perception not just as a limitation, but as a filter that shapes reality itself. Everything you experience, every sound, every image, every idea, is interpreted through the structure of the human mind. This structure is powerful, but it is also selective, tuned to survival rather than completeness. In this sense, it is possible that the universe contains layers of activity that exist beyond the reach of our senses, not because they are hidden, but because we are not designed to perceive them. Just as certain wavelengths of light remain invisible to the human eye, entire domains of reality may exist outside our cognitive range. Intelligence, communication, and even forms of existence could be unfolding continuously around us, yet remain undetected, not due to distance or rarity, but due to incompatibility with our perception. As this idea settles, notice how the boundary between presence and absence begins to blur. What we call nothing may not be an empty state, but a region where our ability to detect has reached its limit. Silence, in this context, is not necessarily a lack of signal, but a reflection of our current thresholds. It is the point at which observation fades into uncertainty. Now, let your awareness move gently toward another possibility, one that unfolds over immense stretches of time. Consider the idea that civilizations may not remain fixed in one form, but instead transition through phases, emerging, evolving, transforming, and eventually becoming something entirely different from what they once were. These transformations may be so profound that they leave behind all recognizable traces of their earlier existence. In such a process, a civilization might begin in a physical form, dependent on biological systems and planetary environments. Over time, it could develop technologies that allow it to move beyond these constraints, gradually shifting into non-biological or distributed forms of existence. Information, rather than matter, may become the primary medium. Consciousness, rather than location, may define identity. At this stage, traditional markers of civilization, cities, signals, expansion, may no longer apply. The civilization may not disappear, but it may no longer exist in ways that are externally visible. It may become diffuse, integrated into the fabric of its environment, or even encoded into structures we perceive as natural. From our perspective, it would seem as though nothing is there, when in fact something has simply changed form. Allow your breathing to remain slow and steady as your thoughts settle into a quieter rhythm. Consider now the possibility that the universe does not prioritize complexity in the way we expect. While complexity can arise under certain conditions, it may not be stable over long periods. In this state, consider how every attempt to understand the universe is shaped not only by what we observe, but by how we observe, by the structures of perception and cognition that filter reality into forms we can recognize, forms that feel stable and meaningful within our limited frame, yet may only represent a small fragment of what truly exists. The universe, in its full depth, may not organize itself into clear signals or distinct entities, but into continuous processes that do not separate easily into categories like life and non-life, presence and absence, signal and silence. And within such a continuum, the absence of detectable civilizations becomes less a mystery and more a reflection of how we divide and interpret what is fundamentally undivided. As this idea slowly expands, imagine that reality itself may be layered in ways that do not align with our intuitive sense of space and time, where different modes of existence unfold simultaneously but remain non-interacting, like overlapping patterns that never intersect, each complete within its own domain. These layers may not be separated by distance, but by conditions of energy, structure, or even forms of logic that determine what can interact and what cannot. In such a universe, entire forms of existence could exist alongside us, not hidden in the sense of being concealed, but simply inaccessible because the pathways required for interaction do not exist. The silence we perceive, then, is not a void, but a boundary condition, a natural consequence of how different layers of reality remain internally coherent yet externally disconnected. Now allow your thoughts to slow further, becoming more spacious, as you consider how even the idea of civilization may be far more fluid than we assume. We tend to imagine civilizations as structured, expanding systems, marked by technology, communication, and growth, but these are reflections of our own trajectory, not necessarily universal patterns. Other forms of intelligence, if they arise, may not follow paths that lead to expansion or visibility. They may stabilize quickly, remain localized, or exist in forms that do not accumulate or project outward. In such cases, the universe could contain countless forms of awareness that never leave detectable traces, not because they are hidden, but because they do not express themselves in ways that produce lasting, observable change at large scales. As this thought settles, notice how the sense of mystery shifts from something unresolved to something quietly present, something that does not resist understanding, but also does not yield to simple explanation. The Fermi Paradox becomes less about a contradiction between expectation and observation, and more about the meeting point between a questioning mind and an open-ended reality. It is not that the universe refuses to answer, but that it does not frame itself in terms of questions at all. It unfolds continuously, without pause, without emphasis, without signaling which parts are meant to be noticed and which are not. Let yourself remain within this awareness, where nothing needs to be resolved, where the quiet continuity of existence is enough, where the silence is not something to be broken, but something to rest within. Feel how the vastness of the universe no longer presses outward, but gently surrounds and includes you, not as something separate, but as part of the same ongoing process. Your thoughts, your perceptions, your sense of being here are not outside this unfolding, but expressions of it, small yet complete within their own scale. And as everything continues to soften, even further, even more gently, the distinction between question and stillness begins to fade entirely, leaving only a calm, open presence that does not seek, does not conclude, does not divide, but simply remains steady, quiet, and continuous within the endless, silent expansion of the cosmos. Let your awareness sink even deeper into this quiet, expansive stillness, where thoughts no longer feel like separate pieces, but more like soft movements within a much larger, continuous field, and where the question behind the Fermi Paradox has become so diffused that it no longer stands apart from the rest of your awareness, but blends into it, becoming part of the same gentle background presence that holds everything without effort. In this state, consider how the universe may not be something that progresses toward clarity, but something that remains inherently open, where every structure, every pattern, every emergence exists only temporarily within a flow that does not settle into final forms. The idea of finding others, of detecting signals, of confirming presence, is rooted in a desire for definition, for boundaries that can be drawn and understood. Yet the universe itself may not operate through fixed boundaries at all, instead expressing itself through transitions, gradients, and continuous transformations that resist being captured in a single frame of understanding. As this thought slowly expands, imagine that what we perceive as stability, stars, galaxies, even the structure of space-time itself, is part of a much larger process of change, unfolding at scales so vast that they appear constant from our limited perspective. Within these scales, events that feel permanent may actually be brief, and what seems empty may be part of a cycle that extends beyond our ability to observe. Civilizations, if they arise within such a process, may be like transient formations, appearing under specific conditions and dissolving when those conditions shift, leaving behind no lasting imprint that persists across the broader structure. Their existence would not be erased, but absorbed, becoming part of the same continuous unfolding that does not preserve distinctions over infinite time. Now allow your thoughts to soften even further as you consider how awareness itself fits into this picture, not as something separate from the universe, but as one of its many expressions, one way in which the universe becomes capable of observing itself, even if only briefly and locally. From this perspective, the question of where is everyone begins to transform into something more subtle, less outwardly directed, and more reflective, as if the universe, through awareness, is gently turning back on itself, not to find an answer, but simply to experience the act of questioning. The silence, then, is not a barrier or a lack, but a kind of openness that allows this reflection to occur, a space in which awareness can exist without interruption. As you rest within this idea, notice how the need to distinguish between observer and observed continues to fade, how the sense of separation becomes less defined, as if everything is part of the same continuous presence, expressed in different forms but not fundamentally divided. The universe does not stand apart from you, and you do not stand apart from it. Both are part of the same unfolding, the same quiet continuity that does not require explanation or conclusion. In this continuity, the absence of clear answers is not a limitation, but a natural state, one that allows for openness, for possibility, for the gentle coexistence of many perspectives without the need to resolve them into one. And now, at the end of this long and quiet journey, the Fermi Paradox is no longer a question demanding an answer, but a gentle thought resting softly in the background of the mind. The silence of the universe is no longer something to be solved, but something to be felt, a vast, open presence. The stars remain distant, time remains deep, and the unknown remains infinite. Yet this unknown no longer feels unsettling, but calming. Thoughts begin to lighten, questions can remain unanswered, and that is enough. Because some answers are not meant to be found, but simply to exist. And in this silence, in this soft awareness, with sleepy dormitions, everything slowly comes to rest. Crescent moon.